Thank you to the moderator for that introduction. And a thanks to the Women Parliamentary Forum, and a special thanks to the Federal National Council for hosting and convening this timely and important discussion. And may I say it's an honor to be standing here among you all at the hub of my country's freedom of speech, discussions, and where most important matters are discussed among us. When we speak about preventing and countering violent extremism, it is important that we are clear what we're actually trying to solve. Traditional counterterrorism focuses on acts of violence, attacks, cells, and arrests. Prevention exists precisely because we learned, often painfully, that violence is not the beginning of the problem. It is the final stage of a much longer social, psychological, and ideological process. By the time violence occurs, prevention measures have failed. Prevention forces us to look and ask for different questions. Why do individuals become radicalized? Where do extremist ideas gain legitimacy? Who shapes identity, belonging, and meaning before violence becomes inevitable? Once we approach prevention from this lens, it becomes clear it is not just a security issue, but an identity issue as well. This is where gender, national messaging, and ideological ecosystems intersect. Gender is often misunderstood in counterterrorism discussions. It's framed as a moral or political add-on, something to be included because it aligns with equality agendas. This framing is incomplete, and it is evident through research and studies that violent extremism and extremism are gendered. Research shows us that recruitment strategies led by extremist organizations are gender-specific. Narratives of grievances and belonging are also gender-specific. And pathways for radicalization differ for men and women. And extremist groups and organizations understand this very well and mobilize this to their advantage. They use hyper-masculine ideals of honor, protection, and dominance for men, while exploiting women as symbols, recruiters, logistics, influencers, and fighters. My fellow colleague here mentioned that women are 15 to 30% of extremist organizations are made of women. And that shows us that women are not only victims, but play also a destructive role within extremist organizations, and they are utilized from these extremist organizations. And because extremist organizations use gender strategically, prevention that ignores this is structurally flawed. For many years, policy framework treated women in extremism as victims. While women are indeed disproportionately affected by extremist violence, this framing is incomplete and counterproductive. As research shows that 15 to 30% of women are in extremist contexts, they're used as recruiters, facilitators, family influencers in extremist organizations. So from a prevention lens and from a prevention point of view, the key question is not whether women should be involved or included, but how their existing influence can be redirected towards prevention rather than exploitation. And women can be essential actors in prevention strategy. Women can work as early detection in early detection. Prevention utilizes early detection as a strategy. Radicalization often begins in behavioral changes, and women as mothers, educators, or community members often are the first to notice this. Not because they're biologically made to notice this, but because they are within spaces that security, intelligence, government spaces cannot infiltrate or cannot detect. Women can also be used in counter-narrative messengers. They can be used as counter-narrative messengers. Because often counter-narrative messages that counter extremist narrative come from the state, come from security, come from intelligence agencies, or from international actors. And these are seen by the community as outside influence, as imposed, or as aiming for a political agenda. And they are often rejected. Messages coming from within the community are more effective. Peer-to-peer messaging is often more effective than a messaging that comes from an upper stream. And women have a high level of trust within societies and can be carriers of this counter-narrative messaging against extremism. And this brings me to national messaging. National messaging is one of the strongest counter-extremism strategies that exist out there. Providing a sense of belonging to citizens, for them to be national citizens and identify with their national identity before any other identity, proves to be an effective and successful counter-extremist strategy. But may I provide a criticism? National messaging in many countries often assume women are included and don't have them as co-owners in this national framing. And prevention is not just about responding to the threat, but building resilience before vulnerability appears. Including women as co-owners is absolutely essential. Because people protect what they help shape. If not, they will feel alienated and attracted to extremist narratives that come from the outside. And when people feel alienated, they will tend to find a sense of belonging somewhere else. And extremism feeds on alienation, which brings me to my most important point. Extremism nowadays does not present itself as violent anymore. Increasingly today, they operate through ideological ecosystems, including far-right, but more so far-left narratives that may be legal, that may be non-violent, but can become vehicles for polarization, mobilization, and delegitimization over time. This is not an argument against left or right policies or left or right values, nor is it against human rights or equality. It is an analytical point that we must put into consideration. When women are excluded from national dialogue, what often occurs is not immediate radicalization, but ideological relocation, which in itself is not harmful, but is extremist organizations use ideologies of human rights, of equality, of democracy for their own political agenda. Because left narratives provide language of recognition, moral quality, belonging, activism as identity, a voice against authority. For women and youth that feel invisible in state-led national narrative, this provides them a sense of belonging. And extremists use that and abuse that to their advantage. Again, this issue is not in regards to left or right values, but when these values are used and abused by extremist organizations, such as the Muslim Brotherhood within Western democratic societies, they're used to fuel hatred, polarization, and extremism. The Muslim Brotherhood often embeds itself in civil and democratic societies, operating and utilizing these environments and laws for their own benefit. They use human rights languages. They frame themselves as defenders of women, equality, and humanity. They operate legally and non-violently at first. Over time, advocacy for equality can slowly be redirected. What appears to be campaigning for peace can become political projects aligned with extremist organizations. While women and youth think they're advocating for peace and equality unintentionally, not by them, but unintentionally by women and youth, but intentionally by these extremist organizations, they become supporters of terrorist organizations in regions that are often misunderstood and conflicted. And extremist organizations have become extremely skilled at moral reframing. They understand that youth and women no longer respond to violence at first. They no longer respond to recreating the Khalifa. They understand that the youth responds to human rights, advocacy, peace, children's rights. And that is, it may begin at such, but it develops, what we notice is it develops to a much dangerous landscape. They present themselves as humanitarian, ethical, and they monopolize moral language. Because ideological capture, as we've seen in the past, rarely feels extreme at the beginning. It starts with moral clarity, moves to polarization, moves to social inclusion, moves to refusal to engage with the other, and then finally moves to justification of harm. And it's a slippery slope. And activism becomes pro-hate, pro-polarization, and a premise for violence. And dehumanization becomes acceptable. The responsibility lays not in the youth and the women, but in policy frameworks that often parliamentarians create that need to engage women. They need to be inclusive. They need to speak to the hearts and minds of women and youth everywhere. They need to engage them as co-owners, not impose that policy upon them. As early detecting agents, and as essential core pillars for social resilience. Prevention is not just about reacting to extremism, but also strengthening social cohesion and strengthening resilience. And women are vital to that. In the UAE, our approach to prevention is targeted at investing in coexistence, dialogue, and inclusive national identity, including but not limited to institutions like the institution I currently direct, the Menara Center for Coexistence and Dialogue. Prevention in the UAE is treated as a social process, not a reactive process. And we have laws and frameworks that protect this value that we have inherited, that protect peace and coexistence, that make sure women and community leaders, faith leaders are co-owners in this policy and co-owners in this prevention strategy. Finally, I'd like to say when women engagement in prevention is essential and crucial, and it is how resilience is built before vulnerability emerges. Thank you.